So, today I'm going to talk about misconceptions in agriculture, why they matter, and why they start to exist in the first place. So, I am very comfortable in saying that agriculture is the single most important industry in the world. And I know that sounds like a really grandiose claim, but people have to eat. And if people can't eat, then they can't do anything else. And so understandably, people are very passionate about agriculture and everyone has some kind of opinion on it because everyone's lives are directly tied to it. Now, unfortunately, with opinions, not all of them are well informed and not all of them are correct. And three of the most common misconceptions that I see a lot are that animal agriculture limits the amount of food that can be produced with plant agriculture. So I think that's the next one. The animal agriculture limits the amount of food that can be produced with plant agriculture, that GMOs are harmful or somehow less healthy, and that the animal agriculture industry is wasteful. So for whatever reason, here recently I have been seeing the myth that animal ag somehow limits the amount of food that can be produced in the world. And this is kind of grounded in the theory that we only have so many resources to go around. And if we spend a lot of water and food and land producing animals, then that limits the amount of plants that we can produce, and these people claim that plants are a lot more efficient per acre. And while that is true at face value, the actual reality of the situation is a lot more complicated than that, because not all land is created equal. So as you can see in this chart, out of all the land in the world, a very small percentage is actually usable for agriculture. And of that percentage, an even smaller amount, this little bitty bright green rectangle, is the amount that is usable for plant agriculture. That's called arable land. It's about 30% of all the land we can grow food on somehow. And so all of that 30% of land, almost all of it is already in use for plant agriculture because of its relative rarity. And anything that isn't used for plant agriculture is usually used for things like housing development or golf courses or airports, because it's usually really flat land and it's really great to build on. But thanks to animal agriculture, we're able to utilize land that we wouldn't normally be able to use, such as like mountains and canyon land that you just can't grow crops on because you can't get a tractor up a mountain. And because of that, we're able to produce food for people in a way that would ordinarily go to waste. And a lot of people claim that this is harmful to wildlife, and while it can be if it's mismanaged, it also is really good a lot of times because cattle occupy the same niche that buffalo used to, and so they fulfill a similar role in the environment, and it actually helps a lot of species that are being damaged by forest encroachment nowadays. So, another aspect to this little problem that people overlook is that a lot of people claim that we spend so much food, like plant food, feeding cattle instead of feeding people, that we could just feed people with that food and miss out on some steak. And again, reality is much more complicated than that, because most of the things that we feed livestock is just not suitable for human consumption. Most of it is food that's been damaged somehow or just isn't as nutritious to people, because unfortunately you can't grow really nutritious fruits and vegetables on everything. You got to grow corn somewhere, right? Corn can grow in a lot of places that say peaches can't. And so we use a lot of foods like that to feed livestock that, just don't provide that much nutrition to people. So on the next slide is the myth that GMOs are somehow harmful. And this stems from a lot of misinformation about what they are and a big lack of understanding about how they work. And so GMO stands for genetically modified organism. And that sounds really scary, to give people credit. Like, that sounds like something out of Jurassic Park. But it really works the exact same way that traditional animal breeding would. So basically, if you're trying to develop, say, a type of crop, let's say drought-tolerant corn, you're going to want to develop something that's both drought-tolerant and makes a lot of corn. And in order to get one breed that does both of those things, you're going to have to combine them over and over and over again, and that takes a lot of time, resources, and money. And basically, the process of creating a GMO takes CRISPR, the gene editing technology, and then takes the one gene that we want from one plant and the other gene that we want from the other and combines them in one species. So we skip the long drawn out process of breeding everything manually, and it allows us to create different varieties of plants and animals that are a lot more suited to their environment and thus are more efficient. So they use less resources, feed more people, and create less waste. So GMOs are actually very, very helpful. The only potential cause of concern for GMOs, as someone who has studied this, is that sometimes when an organism has different genes than it would normally, it produces a different protein, and that's a big deal because that's where allergies come from. Your body reacts to proteins. And so in order to prevent people from potentially having a problem, the FDA rigorously checks every single GMO to see, first off, if it creates a new protein at all. Most of them don't. And then if it does, if any person has any kind of allergic reaction to it, no matter how minor. And then if they do, that GMO is immediately destroyed, it's taken out of production, and it never enters the food supply. So they are very, very safe. So another thing that kind of ties in with my first topic is that animal agriculture there's this belief that it's somehow wasteful and that it doesn't use its resources wisely. And this is really entertaining to me because nothing could be further from the truth. Animal agriculture is really, really great at taking things that would ordinarily be thrown away, like the byproducts of ethanol production, so biofuel from corn, or the byproducts from beer production, so like barley mash. And we can't eat barley mash. That's nasty. Nobody wants to have anything to do with that. But cattle and pigs love it, and they get really fat off of it. And so we're able to use things like that would ordinarily just decompose and create methane to feed animals and then create steaks and pork and things to feed people. Another really cool thing that the ag industry is great at is using every single part of the animal. So one thing that people don't really know is that every single computer you've ever owned, every phone in your pocket, and every piece of plastic in this house was created as a direct result of animal agriculture, because animal fat, which is usually called tallow, is used in the plastic casting process. And short of using some really damaging chemicals that would be really hard on the environment in the long run, we can use tallow to create the things that our society depends on now, especially with COVID. Another really neat thing is that lanolin, which is basically oil from the glands of sheep, is used in makeup production. So if you've ever worn makeup or put on chapstick, then you've used animal agriculture because it's a byproduct of the sheep industry. It's really great for your skin. It's good moisturizing. It creates like almost a durable texture to your skin without being rough or thick or crappy. And another thing that is very entertaining to me because it comes up in conversation a lot is animal agriculture's role in fertilizer. So almost all organic fertilizer, actually all organic fertilizer, comes from animal agriculture in some way. Now most of the time that's just manure, but a lot of the time it's also blood and bone meal. And that sounds really nasty, but in all of the slaughter facilities and packing plants, they actually collect every drop of blood and all of the bone from the animals they process, and then they grind it up and powderize it and use it for organic fertilizer. And so a lot of times I'll have a conversation with people about the morality of eating meat. And one of the things that comes up is them being vegetarian or vegan and relying on organic produce. But what they don't realize is that organic produce is still just as dependent on the ag industry as if they were eating meat in the first place, because you still got to have the manure and you still have to have the blood and bone meal. So it's got to come from somewhere. And if it doesn't come from that, then it comes from chemical fertilizers, which, as Amelia said earlier, can be very damaging to the environment. So, in conclusion, animal ag and agriculture in general is very, very important to the world, and it's very important that we stay informed on it because a lot of policy decisions can really negatively impact ag, and which in turn impacts our ability to feed the world. So a lot of the big misconceptions are that animal ag limits the amount of plants that can be produced, that GMOs are harmful, and that the animal ag industry is wasteful. All of those are blatantly false, and now that y'all are, well educated on the topic, you're well equipped to navigate the world of food and how you interact with it and consume it. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you for letting me present to you. And if anyone has any questions or points of disagreement, I'm very willing to take any questions now. Thank you. Yes.
I do have one question. I know you said animal agriculture is, like, there's no doubt that it's important.
Mm-hmm.
But what are your, I guess, just your thoughts on, like, morality or, like, the ethics behind, like, animal agriculture in general, like, the production of it?
Mm-hmm. Like battery hens is the one thing that comes to mind for me as being really iffy. And that is a very interesting topic because it's kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place in a lot of things, right? So I really like chickens. I've raised chickens. I've been around chickens. They're not intelligent animals, but I really enjoy them. And I don't think it's necessarily that the battery hen cages that you see where they're like stacked side to side are necessarily ethical because that's really atrocious living conditions. But the sad thing is that the world still has to be fed, you know? And so while I don't really, I think that's far from ideal. But I also think it's kind of a necessary evil at this point. And I think a lot of other kinds of ag, especially beef production, are really, really good at keeping extremely high quality of living for the animal. Like dairy cows are treated like queens. They're bathed every day. They have like sand beds that shift and move and like are heated and cooled so they're comfortable all the time. I know my family's beef cattle live out in the pasture. They go wherever they want. They do whatever we want. We rotate them so they don't like wear any one spot out a little too much. But they live great lives, you know, right up until the point where they're hamburgers, right? They live just like deer. So I think there are definitely ways to do it very ethically. I think there are also ways that are not as ethical. And I think if people were to get in touch with agriculture more and to raise their own meat and to hunt more, then not only would they have a better perception of what does and doesn't work for the ag industry, but also of how to raise animals correctly and in a way that's beneficial for both parties. So, yes.
So this part, the animal agriculture, well, it doesn't raise resources, but is that exclusive to the United States? Like, is this all around?
No, it is actually. That's one of the very interesting things about it, and I unfortunately didn't touch on it on the slide because I don't want to take too long. But we actually export a lot of our animal products because there's such a high demand for them in foreign countries. So not only are they also using the resources, but they have such a high demand, especially for like organ meat in China. They really like heart, lungs, liver, kidneys, all that things that we don't typically consume in the US. They really love that stuff. And so we're exporting all of that to China and making a killing off of it.
Okay.
So there's such a global market, it allows everybody to kind of exchange what they want and what they have, and so it still all gets used, even in slightly less developed countries.
Cool.
Anybody else?
No?
Excellent,
No.
thank you all very much.
Yeah.
Me too.
As